So welcome, everyone. Thanks to all the panelists for taking the time to join us today. Really great to have your perspectives on this call. The Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub has had in both of its life cycles here a focus on community-oriented data science activities. We've called that different names. Some of that is related to NSF funding programs like the Smart and Resilient Communities initiatives, but we also have a large and growing interest in the data science for social good activities, and we see a lot of overlap between those two research directions and communities across the region. And so we wanted to use this panel as a way to help bring together folks across the region who have shared interests in these areas, both in terms of research directions, but also things like data sets and protocols and different populations of study. And so this will be one of many activities that we engage in over the next 12 months or so to really help catalyze that community across the Midwest and across the country to be a more cohesive group of folks who are able to share resources in different ways. We had a great session earlier in the year at the Midwest Big Data Summer Institute on data science for social good activities that was very well attended. We have one of our MBDH community development and engagement project awardees, Carl Schmidt, I see on the call here as well, who's working on a workshop focused on faculty development and mentoring in the data for good area that will be happening next year. And so I think that, we're starting to develop a number of activities in this space. I think, Kimberly, you have a workshop coming up as well that we may hear about. So really happy to have you all joining. We have Anita Chan from the School of Information Sciences, or the iSchool here at the University of Illinois, who will be our moderator today. Thank you for taking on that role. We have a couple of longtime participants in hub activities, Kimberly Zaracore from Iowa State University and Valentin Pentchev from Indiana University, who have really been sort of the leaders of the Smart and Resilient space at the hub for quite a while. And so we're very glad to have your perspectives here. And we're also joined by Tayo Fabusuyi from University of Michigan. Very happy to have you joining as well and bringing a sort of different perspective from the, I believe, economic sort of realm, as well as public policy in other areas as well. So thank you all for joining. I'll turn it over to Anita to do any other further lead in that you would like before the panelists take on the next steps.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending part of your afternoon here with us today. It's really my pleasure to get to introduce our panelists. And our first panelist today is Tayo Fabusuyi, who's an assistant research scientist and a faculty member at the Transportation Research Institute at the University of Michigan. His research interests are in urban systems and in operations research, specifically designing and implementing initiatives that support sustainable and resilient communities with a focus on efficiency and equity issues. Drawing on both quantitative and qualitative data, his research develops and applies operations research methods to urban systems issues in a manner that emphasizes theory-driven solutions with demonstrated value added. Before joining the University of Michigan, Dr. Fabusuyi was a planning economist at the African Development Bank and an adjunct economics faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University, where he received his PhD in engineering and public policy. He's an active member of the Transportation Research Board of the National Academies, Emerging and Innovative Public Transportation and Technology Committee, and the Subcommittee on Equity of Innovative Mobility Systems. Dr. Fabusuyi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks for that introduction. So let me begin by providing context there. One, in terms of where I'm coming from, and then I'm going to segue into a project that we're just trying to wrap up, funded by the National Science Foundation. Okay. So I mean, the way by which I'm going to go about this, I'm not going to use any slides, but I'm going to be telling stories and woven into these project. I've really observed that is much more impactful. So, as Anita said, yeah, I mean, I come wearing multiple hats. So I used to be a quant guy, but increasingly, I'm now appreciating more that what gets us past the finish line is more the vignettes, the stories, and being able to weave these into the narrative that is really, really crucial. A lot of my body of work is in mobility, transportation to be specific, but more and more I'm seeing that there are two strands that I have a lot of interest in this space. One has to do with the intersection. So that means that a lot of what we see in other domains may be shaped by access to transportation. So even the criminal justice system, access to job, affordable housing, workforce issues, which oftentimes I think gets lost in the narrative. And then the other one has to do with the intersectionality, where looking at historical injustices, the issue of race and social justice, and how, if you take a look at any city, even more so across the Rust Belt, coming from Cincinnati or the Cleveland area, up to like Buffalo in New York, you could see how freeways run through urban neighborhoods that tend to be minority population, and what that does in terms of effectively balkanizing that neighborhood to the degree to which even investment, let's say you opening up a pharmacy store, may not be worthwhile, you know. So I've been looking at these two big, what I call two big stems or branches, the intersection and then the intersectionality. And it was more the former that kind of sparked my interest in this NSF-funded program called RAPID. So NSF calls it RAPID, but it's not as rapid as it seems to be. So the only sense is that you could write like a dear colleague letter or knock on the program director's door to say, look, we got to go in. We need to harvest some data that are time sensitive. Please, for us to be able to do this, we cannot go through the normal vet and peer review process. But they were a little bit more responsive. This is the very early days of the COVID crisis, where we're looking in terms of households and how they may be impacted in terms of food insecurity that may in some form be shaped by whether they have access to the public transit system or not, you know. So you may ask, what has transportation got to do with access to food? Turns out a lot. So what we did something really quick and dirty to just give us a sense in terms of what is the magnitude, you know. And so what the US Census has this really cool data set called the PUMS, the Public Use Microdata Sample. So these are micro data, you know, obviously de-identified but tied to individuals. So that's the population records. There's another slew of data set to call the household records. And there are unique identifiers. So we could link those two records together and create a very rich profile, either based on individuals or like archetypes or persona, based on folks that share similar attributes. So what we just use three simple criteria. Is this household on SNAP EBT? That's number one. You qualify for SNAP EBT if you're making 130% or less of the federal poverty level within that jurisdiction. That's number one. Does this household, is there a vehicle in the household? You know, which again, I think you guys may know this, that the bus transit, the schedules were radically altered, you know. Even more so for cities that have to essentially be shut down. And so, I mean, Detroit was just a very terrible case where we're doing less than 17% of the peak ridership in the month of April in 2020, you know. And then finally, as these household access to internet services, you know. So, and the reason for that is that, well, maybe you could do, some of us were doing Grubhub then, we're doing Instacart, you know. We're doing Uber Eats, you know. And so the reality is that if you have these households where you do not have access to a vehicle within the household, The public transit system has essentially been reduced to virtually like a shell of an itself. You are on SNAP-EBT, which I'm not sure that you guys know. The Food and Nutrition Services, which is an agency within the USDA, have oversight for managing SNAP-EBT. They've just now running a pilot. They've been running the pilot for quite some time, but there are restrictions saying you cannot even use your EBT cards online. So that means you got to be there physically. And these are some of the conversations we'll be having within this hour in terms of what that restriction does. So looking at those three criteria, you're on SNAP-EBT, which means already you're stressed. Okay. Secondly, you don't have a vehicle in the household. And then finally, you do not have access to the internet. The issue now becomes, with the city locked down, with ridership close to just 13% of its peak capacity, how will you have access to food? So that is the impetus for this. And we're targeting two populations. The folks that I mentioned earlier on that may wear these compound stressors in terms of these layered constraints that they have to deal with. And then folks that were referred from the health system. So this will be like COVID positive households where at least there's an individual there that has been identified as being COVID positive. And that serves two purposes. You want to limit, you don't want them going out, if possible. And then you want to be sure that at least the core things that they need for sustenance, that they could access it. So that kind of explains why this program was stood up. And I could get to the details much later on, but just to kind of give you an overview, why there's a research component to these. 70% of it is more operations driven, which actually I'm increasingly wanting to do more projects like this, where you are in the trenches, where you're monitoring the route in which volunteer drivers are taking to get to these folks, and what portion of the magnitude is being serviced. The Parks and Recs with Erin Casey as the assistant director was the one from the city side, the city of Detroit, that was extremely instrumental in the success of this. And we came in not just to provide the oversight, but also some analytical rigor in terms of which areas to target, which populations should be essentially cultivated and really brought into the program, and then trying to find ways by which we could relax the constraint in time, given the fact that we know that we're only servicing just a tiny fraction of the folks that were in need of these services. So that's kind of like in a quick nutshell, and I think I'm going to give the floor to my fellow panelists, and then we can circle back to me at some point.
Thank you, Dr. Fabusuyi. We're going to then move on to Valentin Pentchev, who is the Director of Information Technology at Indiana University's Network Science Institute. Dr. Pentchev joined the IUNI as Director of Information Technology in January of 2015. He manages a team of IT professionals responsible for aiding IU faculty and research staff in achieving their scientific goals. He's responsible for the maintenance and management of data and data access, development of tools and applications, as well as maintaining and ensuring the growth of the current technology infrastructure. Dr. Pentchev.
Hello, everyone. I have a few slides to share. First, can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you. Yesterday, I was giving a similar presentation which was mostly of who we are and what we've done. But it wasn't that interesting, at least it wasn't that interesting to me. So here I will also tell you who we are and what we've done in the first few minutes, but then want to continue with what interests me in particular in the Midwest Big Data Hub, the Smart and Resilient communities, and what am I looking for future collaborations. Let's see how I would change this. I'm the primary investigator for the Smart and Resilient communities at Indiana University. There are two more of us, the co-investigators, Franco Pestilli, who moved from IU to Austin, Texas, and Ina Cooper, who's still with us. And we're also working with Professor Beth Playley, who will be probably taking the PI ship from me next. spring or summer. A few more words about me. I'm part of a very interesting startup in an already established academic institution, the IU Network Science Institute. We are formed intentionally outside of the jurisdiction of any school. We don't report to a dean. And we work with anyone at IU who works, and not only IU, who works with network science techniques and technologies. And this is confusing to people and includes a lot of different parts of network science and networks research in general, from really massive projects like the Observatory on Social Media, where we process 10% of all the Twitter data and have been processing it for the past more than 10 years now in a humongous database, to what is mostly interested, I would think, to this audience, very small egocentric networks of a particular rank, like the egocentric or the friends network or the support network of colored pregnant women who just get out of the jail system, or the oral health of recent Mexican immigrants, and so on. A few of the projects that we've done. One of the first ones, Brain Life by Franco Pestilli, democratizing the neuroscience in general, in an open platform that can be used by anyone. This led to a seed funding by Dr. Delago, which is using the Brain Life platform to offer neuroscience education in colleges in the Midwest that do not have the program already. One of my own research projects, CADRE, the Cloud Archive for Data Research Environment, in which we present really big and unwielding data sets, both proprietary and open source, to big and small university libraries around the country. And one of the projects from Kimberly, who's here and will talk more about it, about the rural deficit in improving community services. That's who we are and what we've done. What we want to do and what my interests are in smart and connected communities are a lot. Smart cities, to start with one, and especially the disparities that smart cities present between really big operations like Chicago and the rest of the Midwest, where IoT technology is not used the way it could be. Smart education and the use of data sets that we all have in improving the outcomes of not only university but K-12 education as well. Data deserts, which is one of the big issues that we were discussing in many of the previous Midwest big data hubs. When I was presiding over panels a few years ago, expecting everyone to talk about big data and big computers, most of the talks were the lack of connectivity in small and rural counties in the Midwest. This, of course, leads into very close discussion into food deserts, health deserts, and so on. And finally, data standardization. What you see here on this map is overdose deaths in Cincinnati, Ohio, published by the Ohio local government. What you do not see, however, is right here under the river is Kentucky, where they have a very similar map distribution. And right on this left side here is Indiana. But we don't have the data because the data is not shared between those institutions. This was part of a project when we tried to compare, and especially this area, because it's very close in between the three states, where the three states have very different policies on naloxone and other drugs that can be given to prevent overdoses. In one of them, it's freely available. In the other one is a felony for possessing. We had to give up because our data scientists, this was 5 years ago, by the way, so maybe things have improved since then. Our data scientists could not match the data from Kentucky with the data from Ohio, with the data from Indiana. This is one of my own passions, data standardization between the communities of the Midwest. What I've been doing, and in the community building, we've been engaging with industry. We've been somewhat successful there with engaging companies like the IoT lab at Fishers, the LightMind, which is trying to create a different special education based on AI and and augmented reality, and another AI company that we created, AI Day in AI Midwest Day Semirink in Indiana, from Bloomington, Indiana. We were engaging with academia and with different institutes there, like the Indiana University for Center for Rural Engagement, the NCRCRD, which Kimberly introduced us to, Beth Blaidy's Institute to Data Science, and so on. And what we're not being very good at are the last 2 points, which I really want to emphasize in this call as well. First, engaging with local and state governments. We have been approaching different mayor's offices around the Midwest, but there is nothing that I can report of current collaboration with them, and engaging with regional NGOs and nonprofit organizations. My goal from the panel and my goal for the past few years have been to try to organize some sort of a repository of all the different research in Smart and Connect communities that have been done in the Midwest, because everyone I talk to seems to either be doing something like this or know someone who's been doing something like this. However, they are not talking to each other, and they're still insulated in their own, usually academic institutions. This is all. Here is my contact information. I would pass the buck to Kimberly, and I'm looking forward to the panel session myself.
Thank you, Valentin. Our next presenter is, our panelist is Dr. Kimberly Zarecor. Kimberly Zarecor is Professor of Architecture in the College of Design at Iowa State University, where she's been teaching courses in architectural history and design since 2005. She holds a Master's of Architecture degree and a PhD in Architecture from Columbia University. Her historical research examines the cultural and technological history of architecture and urbanism in the former Czechoslovakia. Her new research is about the quality of life in small and shrinking rural communities in Iowa, which is funded by the National Science Foundation through the Smart and Connected Communities program. Dr. Zarecor.
Hi, thank you. So thanks to John and everyone for inviting me to present on the panel. I wanted to say a little bit about MBDH as a sort of infrastructure. John, you had given us some prompts about what we might think to talk about. So I thought I could tell you a little bit about my project, but I can also, that's easier for you to find. But I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the questions, which are like, what are the goals for the community and the hub, and what are some community convening activities that the hub might be able to support, just as somebody who's coming into data science from a totally different context. So to give you guys a bit of a quick background, as Anita mentioned, I am by training an architect and architectural historian, and I had a long career already before I started doing this work on Iowa as a historian of communism and architecture in Eastern Europe. And coming into this context of my career, sort of mid-career, making a bit of a shift to doing what could be broadly called translational data science research has been a big leap. An unexpected leap for me, and I sort of dropped as an alien into your world, and I speak to everyone here probably as closer to data science in their own backgrounds. And MBDH, as John mentioned, I was involved since the beginning because I got a little planning grant from NSF that had a data science component in it. It was my first time doing anything like that in 2017. And we did a pilot study about quality of life in small and shrinking rural communities in Iowa. And during that time, I got my basic education on how to do integrated, interdisciplinary, translational data science work, where the research question itself is not necessarily a data science question, that the overriding interest of the team was more in the social sciences. But data science is a methodology and a pathway for us to start to answer our question in a new and innovative way, because trying to understand quality of life in small and shrinking rural communities is increasingly difficult because people don't want to respond as much to surveys and polling, which is the old way of understanding rural quality of life. So fast forward to 4 years later, since I got that first little grant, we were able to get a much larger Smart and Connected Communities grant in 2020. And we just finished up year one of what will end up being a 4-year kind of stretch into year 4 project about the same topic, focused on the question of how to overcome the rural data deficit, where rural communities do not use data as much as urban communities and suburban communities. They don't have any money for staff. They don't have anybody who are professional at looking at data, professionals. And our project is in part about trying to bridge that gap, to offer tools, visualizations, dashboards, and other things that are specific to rural communities. And I want to actually compare what Tayo was mentioning about his research related to food deserts and transportation in cities. And for example, PUMS data, which is wonderful if you're working in a city. It's useless if you're working in a rural community because the block is so large that you can't get any town level data out of a PUMS data set. So one of the challenges in our work is we have statisticians on my team. There's 3 faculty and now 3 PhD students in statistics, because the stats questions here, the data science questions, are so important about how to estimate missing data, how to work in rural communities where there are so few data points. And so the part of our challenge is a data science challenge that's still related to the overriding social science research question about quality of life. And so for me, the engagement with the hub has in part been to try to kind of broadcast out there through my participation in all hands meetings, which I went to the one in Omaha and have done a couple other things. I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota as well. And I have tried to just advertise the fact that those of us coming from outside of data science as our own area of specialty, or even from engineering or computer science, we have such interesting questions to ask, and we need data scientists who are willing to come with us into the domain questions as kind of pure researchers. So make your services, in a sense, available to us to help us craft the questions and then help us actually do the data work. And what I have found, and it's not just a problem in the Midwest, but in general, is that a lot of people in the data science realm want to do that, but they are not well trained in working with non-experts. They don't have good vocabulary. They don't understand some of the cultures of research and cultures of teamwork. And they also think that they work interdisciplinarily often, but that might mean 2 engineering departments or a mechanical engineer and a computer scientist. The current team that I run, if you want to know what our kind of interdisciplinary looks like, includes a PhD in rural sociology, a PhD in ag economics, who's a professor in community and regional planning. I'm an architecture professor. We have a master's of industrial design colleague. We have a master's of fine arts community artist on our team. We have 3 PhD faculty in statistics, and we're supporting PhD students and master's students in community and regional planning, sociology, statistics. I have some architecture students and also industrial design master's students. So we cut through a different set of disciplines to reach into data science than a typical project. I think my team is probably one of the only ones in the Smart and Connected Communities program, for example, that has not a single engineer or computer scientist on our team. And I say that only to remind everyone that there are other slices of interdisciplinarity that need to be thought of as within the realm of MBDH and data science in general. And so many amazing things come out of those conversations and out of those collaborations, because it's not necessarily always understood or known or talked about, but people like me from architecture and industrial design and art, we have a whole skill set that are not skills that you in other disciplines have worked on, particularly around working with people, around teaming, around community engagement. And so there has to be a fundamental respect coming in, that even though not everyone might have a PhD or not everyone might have a lot of publications, that we all come in with a lot of things to offer. And so I have been pushing in Smart and Connected Communities, and everywhere I go, I'm always kind of talking about this, because people will agree with you, but they don't in their actions necessarily put their teams together and think about their research this way. So I will end my comments, John, by saying that for me, getting people together and validating their research by convening a webinar or hosting a topics conversation, something that can actually get noted on someone's CV, as a kind of invitation, for example, that comes from the Midwest Big Data Hub or comes from one of the partner institutions. I advocate a lot for this, because I think sometimes people don't realize how important that is, especially for junior scholars, to demonstrate for promotion and tenure and for future awards or whatever it is, that they are part of a community and that the community values them. And that's one function I think that the hub can serve, is as a host and as a convener, in truly a literal sense. Like, invite some junior faculty, invite people maybe from smaller schools, and have them, it can be a small conversation, but the act of inviting them and putting their research out into the public realm with something that has a trace on the internet, like if you search their name, their participation is visible. I think this is something that would be really great, because I find that for people like me who make this weird right turn in the middle of their career, it can be hard to reestablish yourself as somebody who has something to say when you're leaving your original domain and going into this team-based research. And so in the embrace of the idea of translational data science, I think it's important for us to make sure that we have enough places for people to feel like they can kind of get out there and be visible. So hopefully those are good comments to start us off, and I'm happy to answer anything about my actual project if you guys are interested.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kimberly, for that. And from my perspective at the hub here, it's very valuable to know the sort of mechanical dimensions of that. We have a strong focus on bringing in early career researchers to this community, and to also bring in non-R1 institutions where teaching may be the primary objective, rather than getting grants from NSF and other places. And so it's very valuable to understand from the community's perspective what kinds of activities for folks in those positions would be helpful. And so something like our collaboration cafe that we have started recently is an example of a venue to bring together established folks across different disciplines and bring in early career people to participate in that. And so I look forward to talking with folks on this call and Kimberly and others about other ways that we can incorporate people from different disciplines at different career stages into those activities.
I'm going to invite questions from our audience in the chat, but as the moderator, I'll take moderator's privilege in introducing some initial questions to our panel, and the first of which was to sort of start to tease out some of the questions around interdisciplinarity and intersectionality that opened up the panel and that became a kind of now has become a kind of running theme throughout our presentations. And in the interest of Kimberly, you really underscored, for instance, how in some ways it seemed like you were inviting almost a kind of reframing of who gets to count within and what kinds of voices get to count, what sort of disciplinary expertises and even non-disciplinary expertises that is outside of the academy get to count as being able to have voices of expertise that are necessary to bring to the table when we're not just framing a data science problems, which by nature tend to be quite intersectional and interdisciplinary, but especially when we're foregrounding a project under a framework of data science for social good or data science for civic applications, how necessary it is to actually bring that back to the fore. And I wondered if we might be able to offer a couple of, it's a big theme to ask how to start to foster intersectionality and interdisciplinarity, Tayo, in exactly the kind of way that you were framing a kind of translational intersectionality as fundamental to your projects. But I wondered if you might be able to offer some stories from your own or examples from your own institutions, just to start to give some different perks of the imaginary. We're talking about, of course, 3 different institutions. We're sitting across a multiplicity of institutions across the Midwest. And some of the questions, I think, as our presenters also underscored, have to do not just with the way that disciplines relate to one another, but also the way that our institutions incentivize or disincentivize certain kinds of relationships. So I wondered if we might think a little bit about also just what kinds of examples we've seen across the institutions in which we're situated in as just a way to open up some possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I can provide a response to that, but I think I would like to speak to what Kimberly said, because that is really spot on, But if I could say folks should show like a virtual hand, how many among us, 23 or 22 folks on this call, are not in academia? I would be surprised if I find 5 or 6. And I think that is part of the things that we need to start really taking on head on, so that we do not end up preaching to the choir. So, what Kimberly said, there is a within tension, even among us, who are, for lack of a better way to put it, in the gown. Okay. Now, the without means interacting, providing co-creation, an agency for folks in the town. That is even a different headache entirely. And I think it really begs the question that if we've not taken care to sort out our own house, I think it really means that there's a limit to how effective we will be engaging with the broader community. But I must say that not all is lost. I think there's a movement in these transdisciplinary way of thinking. 10 years ago, the NSF was not seeing things this way, And right now, you have a lot of collaborative endeavors. You have a lot of partnerships. You have a lot of convergence initiatives, which these things are really emphasized over and over again. That you need to. So even like moving from the notion of smart cities to smart communities, and I think the word communities there is, that says something. But one of the things I've observed is that this is how I started, that people relate to stories. And if there's a way by which we could provide not just a narrative, but a compelling one as regards why, so the computer scientists on this call may relate better to this. There is a saying within the open source world saying, with 1,000 high balls, all bugs are shallow. And I think in the same vein, when we're looking at these problems that confront us as humans, a sociologist, an architect, a computer scientist, an ethnographer, with those different ways of taking a look at this, we could have a better sense in terms of how we get to this. Part of my interest in having a look at these intersectional and then intersectionalities, talking to a professor of urban planning who was at Rutgers, and I just said, how did you end up being a professor of urban planning? And he does a lot of big data stuff. And he goes, oh, I used to be a social worker, and that all the folks that he was dealing with were ex-convicts, was our ex-convicts. And so I'm not sure whether you guys know this, but if you're like the case worker for these folks, there could be half a dozen requirements, but 2 of them are really key. Do you have a job? And do you have a physical address, as in where you go to sleep, at the end of the day? Forgetting that transportation, that's the glue that makes those things happen. We rarely talk about it, And so oftentimes when some of those folks fall through the cracks, we never really actually say, well, the basic infrastructure that would make this possible, is it even there, And I think there's a need for us. I know that it's difficult. I know there's a lot of headache. I know at times it could be a little bit frustrating to engage more with City Hall, now metaphorically speaking. So that could be actually the exurbs or the rural area. We got to be in the trenches. We have to be in the field. And I know that when you need publications to show, there's a much longer period for you before you could have this product. But at the end of the day, we're doing this because we derive joy in doing this. We could be doing something else. That's the way I take a look at this. And I think we got to push it that far to just say, we want to have meaningful contribution. And for us to do that, we got to go meet these folks where they are. That's the reality.
Let me just add, and this was fantastic. Let me just add that this may be one of the roles of the hub, to provide data and data science services to people who are not part of the data science. I mentioned I'm in IT and I lead an IT team, but my Network Science Institute is half full of research scientists. And we don't work with engineer and computer majors. We work with dentists and with social workers, people who are trying to implement network science techniques in their research. And I think the hub is a very good place to offer the other side of this, the data science to people who are not that well suited into it.
I can add something too, but Anita, let's let Carl ask his question and then I can answer after that, if that's okay.
Thanks, Kimberly, for that graciousness. Yes, Carl, you've had your hand up for a moment, so for a while. So go.
It's okay. I'm gonna get Kimberly to answer first anyway out of the questions, so we'll get her a chance to talk. So the thing that jumped out to me when Kimberly was talking, and I think Valentin has sort of some commentary in that perspective too, is it really struck me that part of the thing that outside of academia, when they're working with diverse teams, there's project managers, right? There's someone that is in charge and managing that project that's making sure that or is supposed to be making sure that the voices from different sets of expertise come together, right? And many of us come from a computer science background, but not everyone. And if you think about that idea that like, even on a computer science team, there tend to be people that are working on different components of a project, and someone has to manage putting those pieces together, right? And I wonder if maybe some of what we're missing a little bit as a community is this recognition and acknowledgement that maybe we need to have a person who has management skills and management knowledge. And it's maybe a little bit less we need the person in charge to have a bunch of skills about knowing data or architecture or whatever, but rather they need to be good at figuring out how to help people bring their ideas together and divvy out tasks. And so I think that I'd be interested to hear Kimberly's thoughts on that from that perspective of coming in from a different side and feeling valued, but also Valentin, coming from sort of an IT department, that's something that an IT department often is facilitating, and maybe is facilitating it better than us coming from an academia world where we are used to proposing ideas and being the person in charge. But maybe what we need to be thinking about is, even if we're the person in charge, we need to be hiring someone that's actually managing the project and is in charge, and not us who is contributing expertise.
So I'll answer in a couple ways. One, I participated in something called Making the Leap to Large with NSF. I don't know if anyone else was part of that. It was a workshop for researchers primarily that have like $1 to $2 million grants who want to jump up to 10 million and bigger. They did this series of kind of professional development workshops, and like 1,500 people signed up. So it was not like a small group. But one of the bits of advice they had is one of the things that has to happen when you jump up in scale is that you need to hire professional staff to be the managers of your projects. That academics constantly make the mistake of thinking that they themselves are going to manage instead of budgeting for a proper project manager whose skill set is a diverse, different skill set. I took this to heart recently when I got some internal money from Iowa State with some other colleagues. A group of us got some internal money, and I recruited a totally unexpected person to come work with us who was my student in architecture, but in the interim 10 years had been working in hospitality and restaurant management and doing sales of alcohol sales. And in the pandemic lost his job, and we were in touch. And I realized that his skill set was an amazing skill set to run a research program as a administrative helper. Great people skills, understands how to do cold calls, understands how to read a room, understands how to manage, multitask many things happening at once, can organize all our events and meetings for us, has a master's degree in architecture, so he's very well educated and knows software and all sorts of stuff. And it's been great. He's only been on for 6 weeks or so, and already we just see him as critical to what we're up to. And we share him between two projects. And I mentioned that just to say that I already agree with you, Carl, 100%, that we talk about it as soft skills. We undervalue the soft skills, and there are some people who really have amazing strengths in soft skills. And when you're looking to put an interdisciplinary project together that does have the budget, this is the key part, right? You need to have enough budget to actually hire a distinct person whose job it is to, herd the cats and deal with some stuff that's not so much research, but really administration and organizing. It's great to find people who come from outside of academia, because academics who end up in those jobs, some of them consider that to be a lack of recognition of their research and disciplinary knowledge, right? So by bringing someone in who really does have those skills and has demonstrated those skills, you instead have somebody who's thrilled at the opportunity to come into the space and work with us and, work at a university, which is a really great job in this particular moment. And so I think, I agree with you 100%. And you connected with what the other part that I talked about nicely, which is just that some skills are not valued the way they need to be, even among academics. And like we have a huge wireless project on our campus right now that John knows about and Belle knows about, the Aero Wireless Living Lab, which is a new power project that NSF just funded at Iowa State to put up the first ever rural wireless broadband network. And the PI and I are now working closely together in this other project. And he put this whole project, his project, $16 million together, and didn't really have anybody who knows anything about community engagement. He just kind of assumed that if you go to a community and tell them about this great technology, they're all going to come running and be ready, right? And so, he's discovered quickly that he needs people like me and people I know on our campus to help him. And he's been very open to learning. But the fact that it was even necessary to explain that shows me that there's such a big gap, especially in engineering, in valuing that skill set. Sorry, I'm talking too much, but I do. There's so many people that everyone doesn't know, right? I'm not so knowledgeable about all the technical people on my campus, and I do have a good network on the other side. And as I stepped into this interdisciplinary research, that's been something that people like about me, is that I sort of know all the people in humanities and design, and that's not a group that most of the people on the tech side have ever spent time with. So I encourage all of you to kind of reach out into different contexts. I think, Tayo, you mentioned Rackham. Is that right? No. Urban planning is in Taubman at Michigan, right? So you have a whole college full of people that probably should be working more with, transportation engineers, and I don't know how much overlap there is.
I do not know if Valentin wants to speak, but I could quickly respond to that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a conversation we could have another day. If someone gets a $16 million grant to deal with the rural areas, and there is not a decent chunk of that proposal that speaks to community engagement, I think the fault is more with the NSF, really. I mean, it's to me, I just believe those things should not see the light of the day at this time and age, because these notion of who has a voice, who gets a seat at the table, or who is in the room when decisions have been made, are so crucial, And to me, it doesn't really, this perennial problem where we're addressing the wrong problem tends to be the case when the folks who are directly impacted are not carried along.
And I just want to make sure I was not unclear. There's lots of community partners on this project. What's not there is the academic expertise in engaging with them, right? That's what's missing, not the partners. There's tons and tons of community stakeholders on board.
Okay. Yeah, so I know that at the University of Michigan, I think there is a push. I could see that Christian is on this line from the MIDA side. I know that there's been a massive push to really do more of this community engaged scholarship. That's number one. And then even within the university, across the three campuses, Flint, the Urban, and Han Harbor, that folks talk to one another, So, I mean, a lot of what I do is in urban systems, even though, my home is in engineering. But when I hire students, when I work with students, I have a storyteller on my team. I have folks from public policy. I have folks from the School of Information, and you are right, Kimberly, in terms of the fact that I think I get more education from these young adults in terms of their thinking, in terms of the way they go at these problems, to me, I think I've been humbled to have an opportunity in terms of that there are limits to data, that there are limits to data, and that it behooves us to be able to better marry with these qualitative, these nuances, these things that go without saying, so that at least we could better question our assumptions in terms of the way the real world works, which may not be the case.
Val, I want to give you a chance to talk.
Well, I have nothing much to add. That this all we discuss is great, but it is still inside our own institutions. And what I'm trying to see, and what the Midwest Big Data Hub is about, is not just cross-campus, but building communities which are more than R1 colleges and more than campuses. And if I know how difficult it is to engage someone from an engineering school and someone from sociology, imagine how difficult it is to engage people across state lines, which is ultimately my goal.
It sounds like part of what has been platformed by Kimberly, Tayo, a little bit yourself too, Val, is this kind of notion that how might different, not just our own institutions, but even spaces like the Midwest Big Data Hub, help to change up and reframe some of the kind of fundamental terms of the conversation, whether it's in a call for applications coming from the NSF or whether it's in the way our institutions are representing data science. All those things can matter quite a bit when we're thinking about how to design projects that actually try and not just trickle down, but start from the ground up in a very grassroots kind of designed way, such that community members or local organizations are already part of the research project from the ground up. From the get-go. So it sounds like that's partly what, and we can re-invite folks to comment on and extend that. Kathy, I see you unmiking there.
Yeah, so thank you so much for raising these sort of really important points. And I think, as sort of a group of folks, well, personally, I really sort of like this translational piece. I think in medicine, and I admit that I don't think it has been easy in medicine, but in medicine, I think they've finally got to a point where they do have that respect for translational research. I mean, they do have one of the institutes is an institute for translational research. So, it's finally, I mean, it's only, well, it's 10 years old, I guess now, but, it's certainly newer of amongst all of the institutes. I'm not sure that the idea of translational data science is really stuck yet. I mean, Kimberly, I think you used that expression, and I think that's sort of really telling. But yeah, I think one of the things I struggle with is as someone sort of trying to facilitate these conversations and sort of getting, I think, sort of part of it is that cultural difference, right, between the qualitative and the quantitative. And Teo, I think it's been interesting listening to your sort of switch to storytelling. I'm in a former library science school, and so we have folks whose expertise is actually storytelling. And so to have conversations with those folks has been fascinating. But I guess the thing I sort of struggled with and continue to sort of strive to do as we communicate to the NSF is, this is under a sort of former sort of parallel processing folks who are very much on the quant side. And sort of one of the things that they kept pushing us for was evaluation metrics, what are your KPIs? And so any sort of advice, and again, the narrative is how it comes out, and the narrative and the testimonials are big parts of how we evaluate things. But we sort of had one reviewer, and God bless him, he really did contribute to our thinking, but it was very much, okay, you have a scale out of 10, and I'm almost quoting what he said here. You have a scale out of 10, and is 6 where you want to be, or is 8 where you want to be? And you define what out of 10 is. And so sort of, I guess I'm just curious if we would forward this as a translational research activity, what kinds of things would we expect to see? Because it's not precision and recall anymore, right? They are not the metrics to measure impact in a translational science setting. And so I guess I just wondered if you all had comments on what we would see, how we would know that project had been successful. What are the sort of things that we should strive to do?
I will quickly in 1 minute say that I try to do fewer publications and more presentations, or that maybe not try, but that's how it's turned out. So I do a lot of work to present to public audiences, to kind of speak to mixes of academic and government people, and one of our partners, the Iowa League of Cities. They're our formal partner in my current project, and that's been great. And we go to their conferences. And so I think getting away from publications as the only measure of impact, or the only way to share your research. NSF has been great about that. I don't know if it's a Smart and Connected Communities thing only, but they've been really at the PI meetings emphasizing that they actually want people to stop thinking that publications are the best venue for their work, and instead to think about all of the ways that you're reaching into the audiences that your work would be most impactful with, and to document that. So we are doing a curriculum piece in our project that will eventually be open access and totally public. And, so we have very few publications actually from all of our work so far, because we've really been focused on getting to know the communities and building trust and other aspects of the project. So I would just say there are pockets of NSF where they get this, and they have been very supportive of what we've been up to on my team. But I know it's not universal, certainly, yet. And I know we have to go, but I want to thank John and everyone for hosting us today. Maybe we can continue this conversation in another venue, have like an event on this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kimberly, and
So-
thank you to all the panelists for joining today. This has been very valuable to hear your perspectives. And this, as I said at the outset, is an ongoing activity that we want to do to help build this community. One of the takeaways I'm getting from the panel today is that we want to incorporate community voices and government and other non-academic partners into that community building right from the start, and not have it be an add-on later. And so that is something that I'm definitely taking away from this, along with the early career dimensions that Kimberly talked about earlier. So great session. We'll continue this discussion in other venues over the next year or so.